So I learned a couple interesting things last night. One is that Toshibas don't have replaceable hard drives, even though you can do that. So last night when I was flying down here, my laptop with my demo and my slides and a lot of other work on it died. So last night I rewrote the slides from scratch and rebuilt the demo. The second thing I learned is that Terminal Server is perhaps the best piece of technology that Microsoft has ever shipped. Because thanks to Terminal Server, you actually will get a demo today. Although this morning I didn't think you would. So those are the two great things. And the third thing is thanks for universal connectivity everywhere. OK, so I'm Zeke Koch. I'm a program manager on the Office Designer team. We're a new product to help you build collaborative web applications on top of Exchange. I know this is a 200-level class, and so that's supposed to mean that I'm supposed to be a little geeky, but relatively high level. But first, to sort of get a sense of what people know in the audience, can you raise your hand if you've built an application on top of Exchange 2000? About half of you. OK, how many of you have built an ASP application, like database ASP application? About half of you. OK. Raise your hand if the words form registration, schema, those sorts of words make any sense to you. OK, that's pretty good. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff, but it's in my presentation because I've learned that I need to sort of go over it in order for people to really grok what we're doing. But let me tell you a little bit about the designer. So our goals are to build collaborative web applications. We're targeted on the web storage system, so we're a new Office app. We're a member of the family. We're focusing on ease of use and end-to-end. What that means is that rather than requiring everyone to use Notepad and ADO to define their schema and a bunch of sort of horrible tools people have had to bake themselves, we've built an editor that lets you build an Exchange application in the same way that FrontPage lets you build a web application or that Access lets you build a database application. We're targeting from high-end power users all the way up to the Visual Studio developer. So the designer product that I'm going to show you soon works either standalone in a mode that we think will be comfortable to most advanced Office users, and you can also load it inside Visual Studio 7 when it comes out. And in there, you'll get it next to all the other tools you're used to playing with. And then the other key thing is that the applications we're targeting, you write your application once, and they work either in a down-level browser, which means any HTML 3.2 browser, right? In fact, they go all the way down to Pocket IE, all the way up to loading your applications inside Outlook. And the other is that all of your apps work whether you're working online or offline, because that's one of the huge things that Exchange 2000 gives us. So what kind of apps are we sort of building? Collaborative web applications. What does that mean? Sharing ideas, documents, track issues, give surveys, the kind of apps that probably your customers are asking you to build, and not the kind of apps that Office traditionally has been really good at building. So we sort of think we fit into the Office box by enabling you guys, really, to build solutions for your customers that actually target what they're doing most of the time and incorporate stuff that they're doing in the Office applications as well. It's important to think that the Exchange apps, the sort of apps you want to build on top of Exchange, are more document-centric apps rather than data-centric apps. So a question people often ask me is, why would I use Exchange and Designer instead of Access Data Pages and SQL? And the way I like to describe it is, if you're really dealing with some document, something that you're routing around, or tracking, or conversations, or sort of ad hoc collaboration, then you want Exchange and the Designer. And if you're building an app that's really data-centric, right, that's all about transactions and those sorts of things, then in general you'll want to use SQL and data access pages, or Access and data access pages. And then the crucial thing that sort of differentiates us from a lot of other products in the same group is that our apps are designed to be accessed from anywhere, on anything, by anyone. So that means that we don't have a requirement on IE5 for your client. In fact, there's no client-side install to run our applications. To run the Designer product, of course, you have to install Office 10. But to run the application you build on there, all you need is anything with a web browser. So I'm going to show you an example of some templates that we've built in the Designer to give you a sense of what these sort of applications are. I unfortunately had a much better demo set up, and I couldn't pull it together in time this morning. So I'm just going to show you one of the applications just so you can get a flavor of what's going on. So this is our sample issue tracking application. It's designed to sort of be a really mini RAID, sort of to track some issues, to sort of show you how to build a canonical Designer application. As you can see, it's a web page, so it loads up in your browser. You could also load this thing in IE, in Netscape, and any other tool you want to. You can create new issues. Whoop, my mouse is freaking out. There we go. You can create new issues, give them titles, all the normal things you want to do. This is my new issue. Assign owners, which isn't working this morning. status. We can create new categories, save them, and of course, delete them. So this is sort of a really simple, really basic kind of web application. Now, what you can imagine is taking something like this and adding the logic that actually does the things that you actually care about. And I'm going to show you how to build this app. A simple app like that. You create new things. It's data-bound. It's field in the designer in about 5 minutes. So for those of you who've actually built an Exchange app and gone through the madness of form registration, the madness of defining your schema, the madness of all these other things, you'll sort of see what we're giving you. We're holding the basic framework of your app. So here's my basic slide on the web storage system, and it sounds like most of you guys don't need this. Key things that people who are Office customers often forget is that the web storage system, and when I say web storage system, I mean Exchange 2000 and Tahoe. I have to use that in quotes. We don't know what it's going to be called yet, but that's the departmental version. And the key thing is that it is just a web server. So that means that every ASP app you've ever built before with SQL or anything else as your backend can be written on top of Exchange 2000. It's also a database. You can poke at your mail and your messages and everything using ADO and OLAD. It's a file server, so you can poke at it using IFS or web folders. And it's an application server with form registration, store events, workflow, and all those sorts of things that you're expecting these days. And then most importantly, I think for our scenarios, is that it's both departmental and enterprise-wide. So historically, when you've bought Exchange, you've actually had to upgrade your entire IT infrastructure in order to get Exchange. But with Tahoe, you can actually build the same applications I'm going to show you on top of a departmental web server that you can install as easily as NT Option Pack 4 IIS. So the designer. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to build these kind of applications. So we're giving you a suite of sample applications, 8 of them, and I'll talk about those in a second. We're giving you visual web page and form editing, no more using Notepad. You actually get a real editor based on Visual Studio 7, so you're no longer writing your code in that Outlook really nice script editor for those of you who've built Outlook applications in the past. We're doing schema and form registration visually in a really nice way. You're view editing using the Outlook view control. And we've actually taken the ASP object model and moved it over to something that feels a lot like Visual Basic. So that means rather than mixing together all of your code and your UI together, we give you events that you can pull out and use a lot like the Visual Studio 7 web forms, except for the fact that they run locally and you can use them today and not in 2 years when you're willing to roll out Comp Plus and all those other sorts of things. We're hoping that by using a similar model that we can transition to that once everyone else is ready to actually upgrade their infrastructure and move to VS7. So here are the templates we ship. A project template, which feels a lot like Team Folders for 2000 for those of you who've used it. It's sort of the framework where you can actually plug in lots of individual modules and customize. An issue tracking template that I just showed off, a discussion that does simple threaded discussions, a survey application that lets you build surveys on the web, which actually, if you look at the code for that, shows you how to build a dynamic Exchange application that actually creates its own schema on the back end. So that's a good place to steal a bunch of code to use for the apps that you're building if you want self-modifying applications. Simple List is a stripped-down version of Survey that lets you build a self-modifying application. The document library shows you how to actually integrate your apps in with Office 10 so that when you save a document from an Office application into your Exchange server, we can bring up a profile form where you can add your own metadata. And we show that integration, how you can launch new Office applications from your website to create sort of a simple document tracking, document management kind of system. Sort of a very, very low end of what you do in Tahoe. We also give you a digital dashboard that's based on Exchange technology and a workflow template that lets you automate some simple workflow stuff. So here's a screenshot. I have lots of screenshots in here because I thought I wasn't going to be able to demo anything, and so I put in as many pictures as possible so you get an idea of what I was talking about. I was in here, but I just showed you how this stuff worked. The key thing that you can see here is that we have a view in the middle here, our basic navbar switcher, that we have read and edit forms for each of our pages, that sort of thing. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about online-offline symmetry. So it's been possible for a long time to build applications that work both online and offline, right? So with SQL, you can use MSDE. With the OST, you can bring things down. But the key difference, and the thing that we've really done together with Exchange, is build a platform where your whole application model, your database, your ASP execution environment, all the code you write, all those sorts of things work both online, when you're in some web browser hitting your Exchange server, and offline when you're airplane at 30,000 feet. So when my hard drive crashed this morning, I was actually building a designer application. Right? So just think about that, the scenario of you walk into a customer's office, they say, hey, we really want an app that looks something like this. You go off at lunch, you mock together it in an hour easily. You show it to the customer on your laptop, and then they say, yeah, here's your check, right? Let's go buy it. And then you go back and fill in all the details in the back that actually make it work. So that's pretty cool. So you can design offline. And the way we do this is that we save everything into the local web storage system, and that gets replicated out to your Exchange server. And of course, you can do this either in what we call our implicit online mode, which basically means I'm connected, I'm working as if I'm connected, and I just pulled the plug and lost it in the middle of developing. And you can keep developing until you plug your network back in. And that means that your changes get replicated back to the server as soon as you make them. Or you can work in this thing that we call staged mode, which means you can basically say, leave my live copy up on the server, let me bring down a copy onto my computer, work on it until I feel like it's good, and then push it back up onto the server. Just like you can develop your applications offline, you can also run them offline. If you install Office 10 on your computer, one of the things that we give you is the local web storage system. And the local web storage system has built into it a local ASP execution environment. And since ASP is actually what our apps are based on, right, and web storage, with those two things together, that means your apps, the same code you wrote to work online, works transparently offline. You don't have to write any special code that says, am I online or offline? It just works. Now, there are some caveats for you guys, right? So we couldn't write all of ASP running locally. So there's a couple things that are missing. We don't have cookie support. We don't have sessions. We don't have the application object. But the rest of it, all the core stuff you need for most small-scale applications, the kind of things that make sense to work offline, all work offline transparently. And of course, you can check to see if you're online or offline by checking one of the server variables. And you can look at our sample code, and we show you how to do that if you need to write code that actually will only work online or offline. A lot of people ask me at this point, does workflow work offline as well? And the answer is sort of. You can make one stage transition when you're offline, one state transition, synchronize up, and then your changes get replicated down. But you can't make more than one state transition offline. So workflow is sort of an exception there. But the rest of it just works offline beautifully. And in fact, the demo that I'm going to show you is all actually offline. So you'll see it all working offline. So the other key thing is that we wanted to make it possible for you to write your application once and have it work on any platform. In Office, we often have trouble where we want to roll out a new version of our software out to some large organization like, say, Ford. And they're saying, well, you know, it takes us 2 years to actually roll out enough, and you guys probably already know this, it takes us 2 years to roll out enough copies of Office so that everyone has the new copy. And we can't do that very often, right? But with a web browser, they can hit it any time. So what we want to make sure is that on any HTML3.2 browser, so that means if your customers haven't upgraded to IE5, they're not on the latest and greatest technology, they're stuck back in Netscape 4, or they're using Unix or other things like that, that we want to make sure their apps still work. So unlike other solutions where you often have to do lots of client-side ActiveX controls or DHTML and those sorts of things, we're really targeting to make sure that all of our stuff works HTML 3.2. That doesn't mean you can't take advantage of it. In fact, one, you can write any client-side code you want to and put in any ActiveX controls you want to, but also we give you a way, and I'll show you how to do that later on, to mark some pages as saying, hey, if I'm on an up-level client, if I'm in IE5, use this form instead, because that's my beautiful one where I put all my DHTML. And if I'm in a down-level client, then use this simplified form. And we make that really transparent, and I'll show you how to do that. The other thing is that we've invested in some controls that actually transparently get better as your browser gets better. So the most important one here is the view control, so the main view control that you see, the list. If you're in a down-level client, we render it on the server as just an HTML table. If you're an up-level client, IE5, we actually have a dynamic HTML behavior that acts just like you've seen in OA, right? That downloads all your data client-side. You can sort it and do things like that without hitting the server again. So that should improve scalability a lot for the customers who are actually willing to roll out IE5 or better. And then when you're in Outlook, that same view control gets replaced with the Outlook view control, and you can do grouping, and more importantly, you can get notifications, which means if you leave your web page just sitting up there for an hour and come back, you'll see your new tasks, you'll see your new issues, you'll see your new documents right there without having to refresh your page. So we think that's pretty good. And the key way that we've done this is that we've moved all the application logic to the server. So again, you can write client-side script if you want to, but we make it really easy for you to write all of your application logic on the server. And in fact, we suggest that anything that actually needs to interact with your data gets written in the server-side code, and I'll show you how we do that in a moment. Okay, so Start Programs, Microsoft Office Designer. This will probably not be the name that we actually ship on, but I just wanted to reinforce that we're a new application. We're part of the Office box. All of your customers that have Select will have a copy of Office Designer, and they can use it to modify the templates that you create, the templates that we create, or build templates themselves. It's also shipping in the mod box, but it probably won't ship in any other of the boxed SKUs. So I've booted up the designer here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a new web application. So this is the file new dialog. You can see in here that we have a bunch of our built-in templates that you could install from your local hard drive. You guys, of course, can write templates yourself, and users can also find them from their local hard drives. Or we think more importantly, you can actually choose another Exchange server, find the templates that you've actually created up there, and instantiate themselves using the designer. For now, though, I'm just going to create a blank application so I can sort of show you how to do it, walking through step by step. And then I'm actually going to save it locally. Oh, that was weird. What just happened? So I'm actually going to save it locally in my web storage, which is actually the local store on this computer. By the way, this is actually a terminal server, so I'm actually terminal serving up into Redmond and then saving it locally on that computer up in Redmond. But it's simulating what I would have showed you on my computer here. It's a bit slow, and this is also a debug build that we actually use for development, so it's also a bit slow, so have a little patience here. I'll try to keep you entertained in the long parts. So let's call this MTB demo and create it. So now what we're doing is we're creating a public folder up on the Exchange server. We're putting in the basic schema that we need in order to get our applications up there, and then we load it in the designer. The blank app really is blank. There's nothing in here. We haven't created any content classes. We haven't created any prop defs. We haven't created any forms or pages or that sort of thing. So the first thing I want to do is actually figure out what I'm actually managing with this app. Right? And in this app, I'm going to build you the simple issue tracking app we just saw before. It's not going to be as pretty. I'll talk about actually how we can take the app that I just built and hand it off to a designer and have them edit it without wrecking any of your code in a little bit. So let's create our new item type. So we do file new design element, and we choose an item type. An item type is the same thing as an Exchange content class. We did a bunch of usability tests, and nobody knew what a content class was, so we chose item type. We're going to try to get things moved over to item type, but it's the same thing as dav : content class. And an item type just represents, what is this thing that I'm dealing with? What is this thing that I'm managing? And it has the collection of fields and the collection of forms that are actually bound to that item. So in this case, I'm tracking issues. So I'll create a new one here. And in a few moments, what we actually do is we create the content class up in your folder. We create a default form for you, and we register that form to be the default open, new, and edit form. So over here on the right, you can see our field chooser. This is where it's really slow. So what you're not seeing here is like 1,200 asserts that I've sort of disabled temporarily that are firing, which I think is why there's about a 7-second delay here, which isn't here in the shipping product. OK, so we create a new field, and we'll create title. This is a bit slow. So what we're doing here is we're creating a prop def, for those of you who know prop defs. We're adding it to the content class. And then we're doing a couple other things. We're creating a loc name record, which you can actually change the name of your thing for different browser clients. So if you switch your Office app, plug it into German, then you can actually have German languages and strings like that. So let's do created by, open by. And open date. And description. One of the things I want to show you is that we support any of the HTML controls in here. So we'll make this one a text area since we want to give you enough time to actually create it, enough space to actually put some comments. And we'll give you assign to, since it's an issue tracking app, and we need to know who actually needs to act on this thing. And that's good enough for now. So now that we've created it, I'm going to go and add it to the form we just showed here. We created our default form. You can have as many forms as you want. The forms are bound to the items, and I'll show you how to switch between using which form you want to display your item in a moment. Here's where I discovered this 7-second wait. Basically, anytime you go to the field chooser or leave the field chooser in a debug build, it looks like it's about 7 seconds. Now we're loading the page. Should be here soon. Have any of you actually played with Office 10 yet? Or any of you see the beta? Oh, a good percentage of you. Have any of you successfully booted Office Designer? 1, 2, 3. Excellent. 20 people have made it so far. That's 3. 23. Excellent. Although you're probably 3 of those. We've made a lot of perf improvements since beta 1, and beta 2 is coming out in about a month. And you should play with it then. It's a lot faster. OK, so we're going to drag in our title. And we'll drag in our open by and open date, assign to, and description. So you guys have seen the VS7 demos, but just to make sure that you realize exactly what we get by being within the Visual Studio 7 shell is when we're in here, if I want to create a new table, I can come in here. It knows what the valid tags are, so I can just go find the table tag. It automatically closes it. It knows that inside the table tag you can only have TRs and THs. I can create my TDs, and it knows there's only TDs. And then create a second one. So it's pretty nice, and we think for the people who actually want to edit in HTML, which we think most app authors will want to, this will actually be really nice. It should be a big step up from having to use Notepad, or even front page for that matter, for app developers. OK, so that's our simple form, and we can do save and close. And now what I want to do is I want to actually create a view so that you can look at these things once they've been created. That's that simple table view. So if you've built an Exchange app before, how many of you actually use the Exchange view control? Have you seen the View XML files? So I'll show you how to build the View XML files real easily. Not quite as fast, but we'll see. So what a view is just a simple way to view your data. So for those of you who haven't used the Exchange view control, probably the way you're viewing your data today is you're either using some client-side DTC, maybe you're using some data-bound grid control. More likely, you've written a big while loop in your ASP. Right? You've been a real while loop. You start building a table. You bind to the data. And I'll show you sort of how you would have done that in the old days in a moment. But now what we basically do is we give you the Outlook view control. And just like you can customize the view in Outlook, you can customize it in the designer. You can drag it onto your page, and it's now there, and you're done. I had to call everyone at Redmond and tell them not to use this terminal server during the time of my demo, but we'll have to see. I assure you in Ship it's not quite this slow, although we're not the fastest app in the world right now. OK, so we'll drag on a title. Now we hit our 7-second hit. There we go. The next time should be faster. OK, so we'll do open date. Come on. I know it looks like we're hung. We're not really. There we go. Open by and assign to. And I'm going to drag off these default fields we gave you. And we're done. So I didn't have to edit a big XML file. I didn't have to munge around a bunch of stuff. I think you know that the view controls are very finicky about how their XML is formatted, so I didn't have to worry about whether or not I missed anything in there. We know this is going to load because we actually built it. You can do anything you can do in Outlook. So you can do group bys and filters. You can even do conditional filtering and those sorts of things. The conditional filtering will only show up when the view's loaded in Outlook, but that works, conditional formatting. If you are targeting your app only towards Outlook, you can actually also use the calendar views and the table views, or the calendar views and the card views and all those other views that you're used to from Outlook 2000. If you want it rendered in the web, then you should only use table views, although the Exchange team is working on giving us controls that will actually do calendar views and all those other ones soon, and probably in the Mercury timeframe, you'll get another view or two, and over time, we'll get them all. So now let's create a page to actually show all of our items on. So it's sad. We've now, after 2 months since beta 1, for the 3 of you who've actually used the designer, our debug is now about as fast as our ship was for beta 1. Our ship is actually now, if you're in web storage, quite fast. But debug is not. Add web page. Cool. So there's a simple web page. I drag the view onto the page, and I'm done. as soon as it drags. I can move faster than the designer can. There we go. So we slammed the view onto your page, and we gave you this thing called the action bar up at the top. The action bar is where you put buttons that you want to actually act on the view. So you can imagine a customer tracking application where you have a list of people in your organization. You click on a person, and what you see is a bunch of fields about the person, right? And then underneath, you see a view that has all the documents that person wrote, right? So that's an example where you want to have a view actually on a form. Now, in that case, you want to be able to have a delete button that says, delete this person. They no longer work for my company. And you want to have another delete button that says, delete the currently selected documents from the view. Well, if you drag it onto this action bar here, then we know that it's tied to the view. And if you drag it anywhere else on the form, then we'll actually delete the item that you're bound to. So you want to make sure that your buttons actually go in the action bar if they're designed to go in the view. We're done, so let's save all. And we've now basically written what's in that issue tracking app I just showed you before. Let's preview it in the browser so you can make sure I'm not lying. What do we call the app? MTB demo. So there's my page. It has a simple view in it. There's nothing in there currently. This hidden one here should be filtered out, but we create a new item. We have our simple field. Here's my title. It's opened by Zeke. The open date's 9/14. Assigned to Mike. And some description. Save and close, and we'll see the things now in my view. So that was pretty easy, right? Now, there's a bunch of things that were missing. You notice that I had to fill in the assigned to and the date and those kinds of things. And in a moment, I'll show you how you could have written code to actually have solved that problem. But we took the top main things that we know everyone wants to do in every single app, and we made that really easy. So I can just come into our field chooser, and I can do open by and choose properties and set the initial value to the currently logged on user. This is not currently working when you're offline. Oh, did someone clap? OK. So that's not currently working when you're offline. Open date is, though. So that's the current date. We're done there. And then for the title, I want to make sure that it's required, because everyone needs a title. So we'll make it required. We'll click on an error message. And you can put any HTML in here. So we'll say, please enter your title. I'm going to make it bold so people really pay attention to it. Now I come back over here, and we create a new item. You'll notice that we got the open date. We didn't get the open by, because right now when we're running the local store, we can't figure out who you are, because we don't have your credentials, because we assume that you're all there. We'll have this fixed by beta 2. And I'm going to just try to save the thing without setting a title. And it stops and says, please enter your title. And I say, this is a title. How many of you guys did some validation and people then put in AB, 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 but we don't check for AB, AB, AB yet. So now I do save and close, and it's actually going to let me save, and that was pretty good. So I just built a simple app. You could have mocked this up probably in about 5 minutes if the designer was working a little faster right now, if I wasn't going over terminal server, which means that you could have basically mocked up your simple application for your customers in about 5 minutes. Now, it doesn't do very much yet, but it does the sort of core basic stuff that you actually care about. OK. I'll show you how to code to that in a minute. So what did we just talk about? So a designer application is an Exchange application, which basically means that when you create a designer application, you're creating it in a public folder. We create a project folder for you, and that's actually where all of your data lives. Exchange gives you a lot of features that allow you to define where you want all the schema for your application to reside. One of the key things that we wanted you to be able to do from the designer is take a folder, which is just an application, and copy it and move it anywhere you want within your org, and have that whole app work. So we make all of our apps self-contained, other than the Exchange-based schema. So we create one folder for our application, and the user creates all their items in there. We then create a subfolder for that application, and we call that the resources folder. And that's where we put in all the schema that you need in order to make this application work that isn't already on every Exchange server in the world. Inside there, we put all the design elements, which are your forms, your pages, all those sorts of things, and all your schema. So the key thing is you can then take that folder, you can copy it, you can move it. Now, you need to do this doing web folders, so the properties actually get copied, or using one of the other tools to do that. But you can copy it to any Exchange server, and your app now just works right out of the box. So if you want to build an application that works in the designer, you should do the same thing with your schema. So rather than storing your schema somewhere else and sharing it across all your applications, you want to make your application self-contained. We load the Exchange project up into our Solution Explorer, our Project Explorer, and we clump it into the appropriate categories. We show you all the things that you can visually edit using our tool, right? So we show you the pages. We show you each of the item types. In this case, you can see that we have category and issue. This is the issue tracking app, the real issue tracking app that I just showed you loaded into the designer. You notice that we have two forms here, an edit form and a read form, and that the read form is the default one. We notice that there's a bunch of views that you saw on the left, and here they are defined here. So you can have a group by view, and a group by owner view, and an all open issues view, and it's easy to switch between them. And then we load all the things that aren't the sort of core designer things into the resources folder and show you there. The things that you don't see in here are your property definitions. Well, you see your property definitions, your form registration records, and those kinds of things, because we basically have a really clever way, I think, of showing you form registrations in a way that doesn't require you having a big table with 10 million rows that you have to debug yourself. So that's sort of the major design elements. The core piece of your app, which you already talked about, is your item type. We allow you to extend most of the core Exchange item types. You can also create your own item types that you want to roll out corporate-wide and put them into a special folder inside the designer on your hard drive, and then they'll show up in this dialog. So if you actually want to create your own company's schema and then have that easily used in any designer application, that's really quite easy. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do it at the end, but not very much. Our fields, we define them all using the fields user, so you don't have to use any tools outside the designer to create your. It's really easy, WYSIWYG. Of course, you can use URNs if you want to, but you don't have to. So the field name is actually the URN of the field. We support all the common Exchange data types, including multi-valued string. You can actually change the label for your fields based on what language you are. We don't dynamically change it in your form, but if you change the language of your app and then drag your fields on, we'll actually change the language of the fields on there. And so when you drag them in, you'll get them in German. You'll drag them in English. We expect you to have a form per language. We don't actually switch the forms per language. We don't switch the language within one form. And then, of course, we have all the basic field types, text, text area, radio, select, those kinds of things. We do the simple, really common validation initial value without any script, just from our UI. And then, of course, we make it really easy for you to do more complicated stuff if you want to. Then the key thing is that all of our pages are ASP and HTML. So that's a really big deal. So there's no more forms cubed if you guys are writing Outlook apps today. You don't have to learn any other forms model. It's just web and ASP, just like you guys are using today. A page is really just a form bound to the folder. So you can do anything you can do in a form, you can do in a page, which means you can have data binding, you can do form registration, you can have pluggables based on what language you want, all those sorts of things. The key thing is they're just bound to the folder. So the default thing you'll hit if you hit the root of your application. Kind of like a folder homepage was in Outlook 2000. We have forms. They're bound to an item. That's actually what we just showed you. You can use your pages to display navigation views, template settings, that sort of thing. I already showed you a lot about the code editor, so I don't need to go too much on this slide. The key thing to realize is this is the same as the Visual Studio 7 editor. So it's basically, think of it as vid, for those of you who are using that, up to the next level. So we do better command completion, statement completion, all those sorts of things. And we have a code editor that's also based on their code editor that lets you edit all your server-side script. And I'm about to talk about how to do that. And then, of course, all of our applications are core standard Exchange applications. And since Exchange lets you actually poke at it with almost any tool, you can also poke at your designer applications with any tool. So that means if you want to use Front Page or some other tool like that, Dreamweaver for some reason, to actually edit the UI of your pages, we try to make that as easy as possible for you. So all of our stuff is open. It's all in the resources folder. There's nothing hidden or proprietary or sacred about the stuff that we actually build inside of our applications. So you can actually open our forms in some other third-party tool, edit them, do whatever you want to, save them, and they should work as long as you actually maintain a few things that we need in order to figure out how things are going. And since we separate the code from the UI, and I'll talk about how that does that, you can actually safely hand on this page to some designer, which is what we actually did inside Microsoft when we built our forms. Hand them off to some designer. They can make them as pretty as they want to without breaking any of your code, give them back to you, and all you have to do is hook up your code on the server side, and you're done. So that's a real big advantage to the classic way you guys do ASP and things like that today. So there's our editors. I showed you 2 out of the 3. I'm about to show you I threw in this shot because I thought I might not be able to demo for you. But the key thing is that there's a design HTML tab for your forms, and then your code, your user script, is actually all written on the other side. And if you look at it, you'll notice it looks a lot like VB. So rather than the left bracket % equals and the gunk that you see in ASP today, we give you nice events that you can actually bind to do your stuff. And that's actually how you get the clear separation between your code and your UI. We let you build your views using a UI tool. We give you rich symmetric applications. The views get better as you get better. And they support all the things you're expecting out of the Outlook views. Of course, not all those features work on all the platforms, but we degrade gracefully as you go down to a lower level platform. And the editing is all done in the Outlook view control. So I'm just showing you here like an example of how the pages degrade when you're on a down level browser. So the IE5 view behavior and Outlook, of course, do grouping. The down level views in Netscape don't do grouping because we don't actually support that for the table view. So what we do is when you tell us to group the view, we just draw you a table that's sorted by the thing that you group by. Eventually, probably down level, you'll get grouping, but for now you don't. But the key thing is you only had to write one view definition, and it worked in both places transparently, and you didn't have to write any code to do that. It just worked for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about form registration. So if you've built Exchange apps before, you know that the key thing about the way Exchange works that's different from the way you write a standard ASP app or the way you write a SQL ASP app is that rather than having a form, and that being sort of the most important thing in your app, and then saying which item to display in your form, all the URLs, all the URLs you do, all the requests that you make are actually to the item that you care about. And then you use the form registration engine to actually bind the form that you want to display when you look at that URL to the URL. So this is actually really nice because it means that you no longer have to have, when I write my websites, it's like hpoffice10/bin/tables.asp spec equals 478, right? And that kind of gunk where you have to write a whole bunch of code in your page to actually data bind and load and all those things goes away. All the URLs are things to your actual documents, the things that your users and your customers actually care about. But, of course, you need to be able to show different forms bound to that same item based on what browser you have if you want to. So you might have a little teeny form that's optimized for Pocket IE, right? And then another form that's optimized for IE5, and another form that's optimized for Netscape. If you don't want to write 3 forms, you don't have to, as long as you write everything server-side, because it'll just work. But most of the cases, for Pocket IE at least, and a real browser, you're going to want to have separate forms. So we make that really easy for you, and I'll show you how to do it in a second. Another really common case, because we know everyone here today is working in an international world, is that you want to actually have different forms for presenting your data depending on the language of the browser. So what you can actually do is you can actually change the language of your browser to be, Greek or German, and we'll load up a different page for you that you've localized yourself to actually show you that. And of course, your data will actually display in there as long as you're in IE5, because IE5 supports Unicode. We actually degrade down the code page if you want to, if you're in Netscape, so we can actually convert from Greek characters in Unicode to the Greek code page. I do that, but it's really quite trivial. You can also show a different form based on the command. So that's basically whether or not you want a different form for your new form versus your read form versus your edit form. And you can invent as many of those as you want to just by using the name of your form that you want to display. So let me show you how that works. So just to come back, how many of you have actually used form registration today in Exchange? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you found it pleasant? No one. Okay. So let me show you how to do it in the designer. When the designer loads, which should be pretty soon here. It's that 7-second delay when 12 million asserts are coming up. I was almost tempted to show you the asserts just so that you'd see what we're waiting for, but there we go. Okay. So I'm in here, and let's just, now my mouse is freaking out again. Now we'll do a second page. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to add a second web page. So the scenario I'm going to do, because I don't actually speak any languages other than English, is I'm going to create a second page, and I'm going to say this could be a Greek page. And I'm going to register it for Greek. So I hit save. I right-click on this thing. Wait my 7 seconds. The other moral of the story I've learned is that you should always have a terminal server in Redmond or wherever you're from that has your demo on it, on a ship build at all times in case you lose your hard drive on the way to your demo. There we go. Okay. So we do registration. Okay, that's it. This is our form registration dialog. So there's no big table. I know some of you guys are missing the table. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the way you do form registration in Exchange is you build a whole bunch of items, which are just items because everything in Exchange is an item, in a folder. And you put a bunch of magic properties on there that actually work. And then Exchange reads those properties and decides whether or not to show some form versus another form. So what we do is we let you basically say, well, page 2 is really just a substitute for page 1. That is, it's the same thing as page 1 really, but you should use it for some other specific narrow instance. So I can do it based on some browser setting. So I can say this is the normal default page when I'm in IE4, or this is the one in Netscape. And this list is completely extensible. So if you want to put Pocket IE in here, or a lot of customers using Opera, or whatever it is you want to do, you can extend that and put it in here. If you want to actually say, based on platform, you want to have a Mac one versus an IE one, you can do, or Mac versus Windows, you can do that as well. But in this case, I'll do it based on language. And here you can choose which languages you want to do. And I'm just going to pick Greek and click OK and click OK. So now what I've just done is we've gone behind your back and we've gone and built, I don't know, 8 form registration records that actually make sure that these forms actually show up in the appropriate way when you want to in the browser. So let's go to our browser and fake it out into thinking that I'm Greek. So we'll go to Tools, Options, Languages, and go find Greek. Click OK. Make that the primary. And reload my page. So now what I'm doing is I'm passing back and I'm saying I'm a Greek browser. And I get the Greek page instead. Now, if I knew Greek, this would be localized into Greek. And in fact, if these were Greek characters, right now, without doing any work at all, I'd get them back as Unicode UTF-8 characters in Greek, which work fine in IE. But with just one line of code, you can also get that translated, downgraded down into whatever the car set is for Greek. So Netscape users will also get the Greek characters. So that's pretty good, and we think that's actually a pretty good story for people. Since I'm really only speak English, I'm going to go back and fix this real quick before I... So that's form registration. A couple of people for the advanced, the geeks in the crowd. If you're using other things than the things that we show, so the things that we support sort of off the top of the hand are command and language and browser. Some people are using content state, and some people are using a couple of the other properties. If you actually modify our apps with a third-party tool and add those things, we'll actually respect them. And when we build our new form registration records, we'll create sort of matched sets of form registration records so that your registration records still work. So we've built our model so that actually people from outside can modify our applications, and we should still maintain state, but you should be a little aware when you do it. So that's form registration. Now let's talk about scripting. So the apps I've built so far have sort of been play apps. Now, the truth of the matter is most Notes apps, and Notes sells a lot of products, basically only have about as much code as I showed you so far. Right? That little bit that you saw is really what most people care about. Right? But they all say, well, I just need one more little thing. I just need that one thing that I need to write some script to do. Like maybe I need a resolve button. Right? And I need to do a little bit of stuff when you click resolve. Like maybe we can't let you delete the thing until you resolve it. Now, I could, by mod, Microsoft Office Developer, and I could use the Exchange workflow engine and do that sort of thing. And that's what you want to do if you're doing any complicated workflow or all those sorts of things. And those are actually enforced on the server, and it's really great. But I'm going to show you how to do sort of the basic workflow that you need to be able to in about 4 lines of code. So let me add a resolve button to my form and sort of show you how to do that. I was trying to decide if I should show you the demo or give you the, let me show you the demo first. 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe it's 9. Or 10, or 11, or 12. It really will come back. Assert, 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 assert. The code page doesn't match the one that you... There we go. OK. So what you notice so far on your page, let's go back to your form. What you noticed in here is that there's no ASP in here. There's nothing that's yellow, except for this one little thing at the top that says that I'm using VBScript as my language and what the code page is. So that's pretty good. So this is a safe file to pass around to anyone, right? So let's go add some code to it. So we can go to View Code. Oh, clicked in the Project Explorer, 6 seconds. So in the back, I actually give you links to builds that you can actually install to use the designer now. We gave a refresh of the beta 1 that's mostly for people inside Microsoft. And for those of you who've played with it so far, you should install that. And if you use the ship version of 2021.4, and I'll show that to you in a moment on a slide, it's actually pretty fast. And you actually build your apps inside web storage. And then hopefully by the time we ship, building it on top of your real servers will be that fast too. So let's do view code. And we have a nice, pretty blank page because you haven't written any code yet. So in a normal ASP app, and I'll walk this through a little bit, you actually mix in all of your code with your ASP. So you usually have like a big section at the top of your page where you have a bunch of code that actually says, if this thing got passed on the command line, go do this thing. If this thing is, then do this thing. Draw the special text here. What we've done is we've given you a simple set of events that you can program against that feel just like a VB event or like a web forms event that you can use. So I forgot to put the resolve button on my form. And of course, all of your events get posted back automatically. So now let's add a delete button so we can delete the issues that we don't care about anymore. And let's add a resolve button. So we have this thing called the generic button. And a generic button is just a button, kind of like any VB button. We can give it a name or label all we want. But the key thing is that this button, when you click it, will actually trigger an event on the server that you can catch and then do whatever logic you want to. So let's call this CMD resolve. So what resolve does, for those of you who don't live in RAID for a living like I do, is resolve does is it says, take this issue that I'm on, say that I'm done with it. So what I want to do is I want to assign it back to the person who opened the issue, right? And then I want to allow that person to delete it and clear it from the list of things, right? So it's a real simple button. That's all it does. It's sort of a little two-stage workflow, right? I create an item. I put it in, like, here's the task. I really need you to be able to solve this problem. I assign it to someone. They then get it in their list of tasks they have to deal with. When they're done, they click resolved or completed or done, whatever that thing is. It gets assigned back to me, and then I can delete it. So the things we want to do is when you click the resolve button, we want to make sure that the person who it's assigned to goes back to the person who opened it, right? And then we want to allow you to delete the item. So the first thing I can do is I can come into my form and I can find all the objects that I live in. So there's an object for the form where you have a bunch of form-wide events that happen every time your page loads. And then there's another one for each of your actions. So these are the buttons you dragged onto your page. And then we also give an event for each of the fields. So I can come in here for command resolve and choose the click event, and we'll stick in a little event handler for you. This will get called anytime your user actually clicks on the resolve button from the client. So what basically happens is we catch the click, we post the form back to the server, we notice that it was the resolve button that got clicked, and then we trigger this event for you. So because I don't like typing in front of other people, I actually already wrote in my little code here. It's 2 lines of code. Could have typed it, but the demo's slow enough as it is. Wow, maybe that was slower than I could have typed it. So one of the cool features of VS7, for those of you who haven't done it, is this toolbox here. So you can drag any HTML snippet and just drag it into your toolbox, and you now have a little scrapbook. If you get mod, which is going to come out, they actually have a really nice code librarian feature that has thousands of sample code that you can use to build your designer applications. And that'll be really good. I think there's a mod talk at this event. If not, at MEC, there'll be a bunch of them. I don't know why that didn't get inserted. Let's try this again. So there's our code. So what I do is I take this web form, which is bound to the current item that I'm onto, and I go to the fields collection. So I basically say, for this current item I'm on, go find the assigned to field, set its value equal to the created by field. So that basically says assign the bug to whoever opened the thing, whoever created it, and set the status equal to resolved. Now, I just created the status field, and so one of the really nice things about Exchange is I can just, of course, ad hoc add fields whenever I want to. So let's go create a new field that's called status. I'll click Save. So I've now just made my new happy field. It'll show up in a second here. And then what I want to do is set the initial value to the field to be active. So the bugs start off active, of course, until someone deals with them. And then we should go probably drag it onto our form so that people will know what the state of the thing is. One of the things that we find people often want to do in the designer is they'll want to create some fields which are sort of read-only and some fields which are editable. And so we give this little checkbox here. Now we have to wait our 7 seconds, where you can actually click and it'll drag it on as a span, basically, a data-bound span. As soon as the field chooser comes back to life. There we go. So now we put our little span on there. So now let's go back and prevent the deletion. So there's a couple different ways that I could write this feature. But the way I'm going to write it is I'm basically going to say anytime you're about to delete the item, unless the status is resolved, don't let me delete it. So we give you a bunch of events on the form. One of the events is before delete. So this gets triggered anytime you call our delete code. And then I'm going to stick in here before delete. So that's just a couple lines of code. They basically say if the status of your item isn't resolved, then set this error string thing, which is some magic that I'll talk about in a second, equal to only resolved bugs can be deleted. And then I cancel the delete event. So I set the cancel default equal to true. So that should do it, basically. I've created a new button. I've allowed you to delete it. And I've made sure that you can't delete it unless you hit resolve. So let's save everything and preview it and see what happened. And of course, because this is just ASP on Exchange, the code that I wrote in here could be anything. So you have access to any of the properties and things that you'd want in ASP. You have access to any of the COM objects that you know are going to be on all your customers' either servers or clients. So that means that if you want it to run locally in Outlook, or if you have Office 10 installed, you need to make sure that those are COM objects that are on the server, but on the client machine. But some of the ones that are there are like ADO. So if you at this point had to actually go outside of Exchange, write some SQL code, and I thought about doing this for my demo, and I've done it for other demos, write some SQL code that actually goes off to your SQL server, checks your SAP database, whether or not you have permissions or access or something like that, and then does something based on this. That's just as easy to do. It's just a couple more lines of ADO code. And it fills up my screen a little bit too much, so I tend not to do the demos. So everything's saved, so let's go preview the thing. Let's create a new item. You'll notice that the status is now active. The title is me. Let's save and close it. Oh, I didn't do an open by or assign to. That's no good. Let's do it again. Delete me. Open by Zeke. Assign to Mike. Save and close. So we've created our item. So now let's go open delete me and try to delete it. So it's asking me if I really want to delete it. This is our client-side script that we did just to be nice to people. And then it goes off to the server, and it comes back and it says, whoa, only resolved bugs can be deleted. And I go, that's OK. Well, I'll go resolve the bug. So I'm going to click resolve. It changed the open by to the assign to. I don't know why that didn't work, but. And now if I hit delete, it'll actually delete the item. Probably because I changed the property this time around when I did it. So that was pretty good. That was like real simple workflow, the kind of thing that's sort of brain dead. But it's supposed to illustrate how easy it is to write code. And a couple things. Like one, notice I didn't have to change my form or my UI at all. Two, I got to write my code really simply. In this event handler, I got to trigger the events. I didn't have to like read the request variables. I didn't have to read the server string. I didn't have to put hidden fields in my form, any of that kind of stuff. If I wanted to do all that, I could have, but I didn't have to. OK, so let's talk a little bit about our model. Things that we do in order to actually prevent people from mucking with your forms is you want to separate, you want to do all your data binding declaratively. So those of you who've heard the Exchange talks know way too much about this, so I'm going to breeze through that slide. We also want to separate all of our UI from our script, and we want to try to end spaghetti code. So that's what I mean by spaghetti code is all those response.writes in the middle of your forms. I know that a lot of you guys have written ASP apps, and I know the bigger ASP apps that I've written are like insanely hard to actually manage because I have all my UI and my code together. So one of my designers came to me and he said, oh, man, this website's really beautiful, but like we really need a blue background here, and can you make it a table instead of just a list? And I started crying, right? Because all my code was mixed in there, and I couldn't even read it anymore, and I was writing server-side and client-side script. And so we're trying to fix that. So here's a normal ASP form. So this is edit issue, right? It's my edit issue form. What I do is I basically create an object to grab a record. I get all the data based on the item that I'm actually selected to. I'm assuming this is an Exchange app. I check to see whether or not the user command is save. And if it is, then I set the title of my record on the server, right, equal to the title that got passed into me from the browser. I update the item. I'd redirect back to my parent, right, which is the main folder view. And then inside my page in my ASP here, I put a little input, and I do a little, the left bracket % equals R title. So if you've ever written an Exchange app in ASP, I'm sure you've written this code already, right, which basically says, I need to update some data, so I need to find the item that I'm currently bound to, which you can get from the user command, from the data URL. I need to find the thing. I need to grab all the stuff I was posted back, assign it back, and do all that gunk. So here's what you do in Designer, or web forms for that matter. All the ASP is gone. So all I do is I do input name equals title and class equals field. What this says is this is a data-bound field that's an Exchange data-bound field, that the property that it's bound to is title, and the class is field. And now whenever I save this form, if I have a user command value equals save, if I have a save button on this form, we'll post back, we'll realize it's a save, and we'll automatically save all your data for you. So you're done. You didn't have to write all that code. So the problem is that traditional ASP mixes up your code in your UI. So if you've seen the Visual Studio 7 talks, you know this is one of the big things that they try to do in ASP+. And we've tried to give you a piece of ASP+ without actually having to upgrade all your servers and move up to migrate and learn the new programming models and all those sorts of things. We hope that all the things you do to actually program against the designer today will be leveraged when you actually move over to ASP+ in the future. And of course, the designer itself will eventually move over to ASP+. But we need to ship now and not when ASP+ comes out. So the hard problems about ASP mixing your code and UI is that it's really hard to display in visual tools. You know, nobody can read your ASP, so all you see is like emptiness, or most of the time you can't even go into design view, right? Like I know in Vid, I can never go into design view. It's really hard to separate the web page design from the development, which means you can't hand your page off to some graphic designer and have them make it as pretty as you want. You have to do all that hand tweaking of HTML code yourself. It's insanely hard to maintain. So we see two different pages. One that's your UI, and another one's that's your code. So here's some basic ASP validation. So here's how I would have written the is required field in ASP. Right? I have all the gunk I had before in the last form. And then I write a little code that says, you know, if the title property on my record is blank, then I set some variable equal to please enter a title. Otherwise, I update the item and redirect back to the parent. And then down below in my form, here, I'd have to have this like variable that's sitting in here in the middle of my form that says, this is where the error would go, right? This is where it would be. Instead, what we've done is we've given you a little event, a validate event on that item. And we've given this property called error string. So if you go to the elements collection, I'll talk about that in a moment, and set an error string, what that says is put whatever string you did in the error right after whatever element had the error on it. And then set the has errors bit on the web form object, which lets you know that you should never save the thing. And then our code, which actually does the save, sees that there's at least one error string and won't let you actually save the item. And then it'll just post it back to the client. You'll see your little error string right there, and you're done. That's where I was going to do the demo. OK. So here's the event model that we give you. We give you a before-after save event, a before-after delete event, a before-after set, set's a little weird, and a before-close event. So these are events that we trigger that you can trap. These are all server-side events. If you want to trap events client-side, you can, of course, using DHTML, but then you're risking your code not actually working in all browsers. Now, if you want to write the client-side script, it's totally fine. There's nothing about the designer that doesn't. You can do everything you could do in Visual InterDev or in Visual Studio 7 or those sorts of things. But it's been our practice in Redmond that like most of our bugs have to do with browser compatibility bugs. And so we try to minimize that as much as possible, so we do everything on the server. We also give you an initial value and a validate event on the field. An initial value gets called the first time you load a form, so you can actually pre-populate them with certain kinds of things. And validate gets called anytime your field changes, so you can make sure that the field was valid. So another way of writing the, you know, don't delete unless the status is active is I could write a validate event on the status field and say if it ever changes, don't allow delete. But it's a little weirder. We also give you the ability to put buttons that do whatever you want to that get called whenever you click them on the server. So we give you what we call them as action buttons, and you can grab them from the server and post. On the server, you need to program against something. So since you're no longer mixing together your UI and your form, right, you need to actually have something. You need to be able to actually have something where you can modify the UI, and you can also get access to your data. So the web form object, which is an exchange object that we use in the designer, has two major collections that handle this. They have a fields collection and an elements collection. The fields collection represents the data that you're currently bound to. So that's the item that you're currently on and all the properties of the item that you're currently on. And that gets handed back to you as an ADO record. And the elements collection actually represents all the UI on your form. So that means any named element you can actually access using the elements collection. So that's the way you kind of do something like where you want to normally have a big response.write block. What you can do is go slap a div on your form, stick a name on it, and then from the server, set the value of that div equal to whatever your big string of HTML is. And the web form object will automatically render that when they pass the page back to the client. So that's the way that you do sort of the big response.write blocks that you kind of do today. And if you look in our templates, a good place to look at the sample for this is our nav bar. So the nav bar that we show on the left of all of our templates, we actually go off, we query all the views in the folder so you can dynamically add views. We then go build up a big HTML table with URLs and all those sorts of things. And then we just data bind a div to it, and boom, there it is. It shows up in your UI. So that's how you do dynamic UI. We also give you a bunch of attributes. So there's a code page attribute, and that's the thing you actually use to downgrade the form from Unicode or UTF-8 to whatever code page you actually want it to be on. We give you this has arrows, so you can check whether or not anyone set the error string on anything. We tell you if the form is new, and an else is similar. The else basically handles sorting and grouping and those sorts of things for international scenarios. And then the methods are render and update. Render just posts the thing back to the server, and we handle that in our boilerplate. And update actually saves your item. And usually you should call our save event, because then you'll get all your event handling to get called. But you can actually call the web storage system, forms, save, update property if you want to as well. So fields and elements, though, are really the thing that everyone wants to do. So again, the field is just the ADO record of the currently item that you're bound to. So if you're bound to foo.eml, it actually gets bound to foo.aml, and you can access any of the properties, you can set any of the properties, you can do whatever you want to with them. And then the elements represents all the UI. And you notice that I use the error string a lot, because that actually flags an error, so you don't allow saves. And the attributes collection lets you actually modify any of the HTML attributes. So you remember when HTML first came out, what everyone used to do is they'd want to do when you hover over something, make it turn red. Well, the way you do that server side, right, is use the attributes collection. So you do like web forms, myname.elements, myname.div.attributes class equals, and then you can change the class or the style or all those sorts of things. So you can start moving a lot of that code you've been writing client side, because the only way to do it server side, which means it'll work on any browser. So here's an example, but I just showed you, I think, a better example when we did our demo. OK, so that's the done of the platform part of the designer. Let me talk a little bit about the designer application itself. So we're based on the Visual Studio 7 shell. So that means that any of the COM add-ins or design element templates or any of those sorts of things that you can do to extend Visual Studio 7, you can also use to extend the designer. So what we're hoping is lots of people will take the 10, 15 features that we didn't have time to add to the designer and add them themselves as COM add-ins. It's really quite easy to do. We have a huge object model that actually exposes both everything you can do in the shell and everything you can do in the designer. And you can play with that and munge with that, and we use that internally quite a bit. You can also create new design element templates. So if you want to have your own custom schema, you can build new pages, forms, views, resources, all that sort of thing. Again, we are a VS7 app, so anything you can do to Visual Studio 7, you can do with the designer. Here's my summary. So we're a rad tool for building web storage system apps. So we're hoping that it should be really fast to slam together, prototype, and deploy an application really quickly. It's crucial that all of your apps work symmetrically online or offline. Right? That's the big thing we have. And that they work in reach or rich, which really means they work in any browser. But if you have a good browser, then you get more features, hopefully for free. You can design and build your apps offline. So from your airplane when you're on your way to your conference, or at your client's office, or anywhere, you can actually build your apps. It should be easy enough for power users to make simple modifications, drag on fields, add a little schema. No longer will they have to call you and say, oh, we need one more field on our form. They can just do it in the designer, right? And they're done. But it should be flexible enough that if you really want to go and add a server-side event, or you want to go do a bunch of more hardcore stuff, you should be able to do it right underneath us, and we'll play fine in that world. Plus, because we have all the Visual Studio editing features, you can do anything you could do in Visual InterDev or VS7, except for the web form stuff. Here's how you get more information. I know this is a lot of stuff to throw at you at one moment. So there's an alias called OD users. That's for everyone who wants to actually use the designer. Our documentation is up at this big, long URL. I believe all the slides are posted somewhere, so you can grab it from there. The install point for Office is whack Office Rel releases, and we're in the Pro Plus SKU. And I'd recommend installing build 2021.4, which is our beta 1 refresh. We sent out to a bunch of customers, and we fixed a bunch of the problems for beta 1. So those of you who tried us in beta 1 and got frustrated should try us again. And then in about a month, we're going to ship beta 2, and that's promising to be a lot faster and a lot better. We have a hosted Exchange server that actually has the latest version of web forms on there, so you can use to actually build your applications against if you don't already have an Exchange server locally. And if you want access to that, send mail to hosted@microsoft.com. And then, most importantly, if you do play with the designer, please, please, please log bugs. There's lots of them. We're a V1 product. It's really hard. Send mail to, or go to HTTP off bug, and you can log bugs. Questions? I think you're supposed to go to the mic, but you can just shout, and I'll repeat the question.
I get asked by customers all the time, what is Microsoft's workflow strategy? I hear about the web store, I hear about Office 10. Can I definitively tell a customer, this is it, this is our workflow strategy, use this? Or are there other competing technologies that we have?
So within Microsoft, as far as I'm aware, there's two major workflow platforms, which is you can build them on top of SQL, or you can build them on top of Exchange. And BizTalk, sorry. So the question, just to repeat it in case they're televising, is what's our strategy for workflow? And the truth is I'm not an expert on this. So there's BizTalk and Exchange and SQL. Mod, Microsoft Office Developer, which basically ships a copy of Designer with workflow added to it, lets you target either SQL or Exchange on top of there. So I think that's a really good place for customers to go. But the truth of the matter is I can't contrast BizTalk versus the other two ones at all. Should be a session on it. Do you know what number it is? So look at message. There should be something on the workflow, and ask the guy who actually speaks there. Noam Topaz is the guy giving the presentation.
At last year's Mac, there was a session that was form development against the web storage system. They had an iPad until front page 2000. Is that completely gone now? Or are we going to give customers that aren't migrating Office 10 immediately tools to use in their current environment?
Right. So the question is at Mac last year, they showed some great front page COM add-ins that actually let you build web storage system forms. And the question is, are those gone? What's the story with them? Can we give them to customers today who haven't rolled out to the designer yet? They're still continuing development on there, but they're not planning on continuing it much farther. So that's still available, and you can still use it. The forms that you actually build in there, it's quite hard to actually add script and code to, so it's really good for prototyping and mocking up stuff, but they don't really have a scripting model behind them. So they're fine for actually building your stuff and getting stuff together really quickly, but you should probably migrate to Designer really quickly. You don't have to migrate all of your customers to Designer in order to actually use the Designer. You just need to be able to get your developers on there. But in the short run, the form stuff is still there. The Morpheus stuff, I believe is what we're calling it, is still there. And you can still use it. And all that stuff is on msdn.microsoft.com/exchange. In the back? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, at the PDC, they saw Server Explorer, which looks very similar to Office Designer, and are there any plans of integrating them? So they're actually really quite different products, and they're focused at very different users in different scenarios. And in fact, at the MEC, my advanced Office Designer talk, I'll actually show you how to integrate the two and use them both for what they're doing best. Server Explorer is really good at getting to the nitty-gritty details of Exchange schema, for modifying properties, for doing a lot of that sort of stuff. And it's totally fine to actually use Server Explorer and Designer together in one application. And in fact, there's often things where you'll go beyond what the Designer supports, where you'll want to use Server Explorer. But for doing basic things like getting your pages built, getting them all built up, defining your core basic schema, doing your form registration engines, you'll want to use the Designer. And then when you make custom modifications to it, you might want to use the Server Explorer to tie it together. There's going to be yeah. So there's a great question, which is how do I migrate existing Outlook 2000 applications to Office Designer applications, and how do I do it? So there's going to be a great talk on this at MEC a month. And if you're going to MEC, then it'll be there. And there should be a white paper coming out pretty quickly. I don't have a lot of experience in that, so I'm not the right person to talk about it. Yeah? Yeah, so the question is, do we have any integration on Tahoe? So other than being able to use the store, the short answer is no, and the long answer is sort of. So the short answer is you can't build Designer applications inside a Tahoe workspace. But we think that Tahoe is probably the premier platform for actually building Designer applications on top of. So we actually think that Tahoe is a great vehicle for web storage systems, the department-wide web storage systems. And so we're strongly encouraging and strongly messaging that people use Designer and Tahoe together. But the workspace itself is not customizable in the Designer. It's definitely something we're working on and we're looking forward to, but we just couldn't make it happen given our ship schedules. So the question is, do we have any rich integration with Office Web Components? No. I mean, they're IE5 ActiveX controls, and so you can drag them onto our form and use them just like you would in any other HTML forms. You can use them on the server if they're on your server. There's a few caveats here and there, and so you can use them, but we haven't done a lot of work to integrate them together. So the question is, can an Office Designer application be saved out as a web part so I can use them immediately? Actually, Mod is shipping an add-in that actually lets you do that, exactly that. So basically, when Mod comes out, which should be, I think, shortly after Designer ships, but I don't know the exact details, they'll add workflow, and they'll also add something that allows you to take Designer components and turn them into web parts. Yeah, so the question is, why is it called Office Designer when it really looks like it's an Exchange Forms Designer? So we're in the Office group, and we're an Office product. And so we're funded by Office and chartered by Office, and we're intended to help Office developers and Office users actually leverage the power of web applications. And we think that the best platform for doing that is Exchange. So we're definitely targeted towards Exchange. As to what our name is, it probably won't be the Office Designer. That's just what we've been using internally. We don't know what the name will end up being, and I don't actually know how it's going to be messaged. But for now, the real key point is that it's an Office application. It's intending to expand the suite of what you can do in Office. We found a lot of our developers inside Office really like using VBA. They really like building apps in Access. They really like doing those sorts of things. But their customers are asking them more and more and more to build web applications. They're asking them more and more to build data-based web applications. They want their applications to be able to work offline, and they want exactly these things that we've given them in Office Designer. So we think it fits very well in with the Office suite, which is this is sort of the 9th Office app, the custom one that you built for your application, where most of your users actually listed at the time. Yeah?
Have you done any testing on the scalability of this?
So the question is, have we done any testing on scalability of this? So there's a bunch of questions there, which is like, how scalable is the web forms platform? How scalable is the ASP-based forms rather than the ISAPI filter stuff, and those sorts of things? And the answer is we've done some preliminary work on that, but not very much.
So I'm thinking something like RAID or MS
Right.
Market or MS Expense. Could those run on this?
So the answer is we don't know yet.
Okay. Or do you know if they will? I mean, it seems like that'd be a great showcase out there.
So RAID isn't really the